Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another exciting talk from the Oxford Guild and our Collegium Global Network and our partner societies from leading universities. Today, we're delighted to be hosting the special online event with Helen Dickinson, OBE, who is the CEO of the British Retail Consortium. In her role, Helen is one of the most important figures in the British retail industry and is a former partner and head of retail at KPMG. She's been attending government briefings during the COVID-19 pandemic and is one of the most prominent voices around several very topical issues, including the future of the high street. This is not just in light of the pandemic's impact on retail, but also around issues such as the rise of e-commerce and automation, the fourth industrial revolution, Brexit, and business rates. The BRC is responsible for liaising between British retail firms, the government, and the public, and its membership boasts all of the major retailers in the UK, amounting to over 5,000 businesses, delivering over £180 billion of retail sales per year and employing over 1.5 million employees. She is also the former chair of Working Chance, which is Britain's largest charity helping female offenders get back to work. Today, Helen will be discussing what is going to happen to the high street and answering your questions. Thank you very much again, Helen, for taking the time to join us and share your insights. And over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emmas. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking to you this evening. I'm honoured to be called one of the most important people in retail. I'm not sure I'll quite live up to that, but I will do my best over the next 20 minutes or so and share some thoughts on just some of those topics that Abbas sort of highlighted in the intro, and then most importantly we'll hopefully have some great questions from some of you about everything that's been going on, because certainly I mean, I've been doing my job at the BRC for about 7 years, and I don't think, I mean, retail definitely gets its share of the headlines, but never more so than over the last 3 months, and never more so has it played a more important part in all of our lives. So as introduced, I am Helen. I am the Chief Executive of the BRC. The BRC has got hundreds of businesses who are members, and they span all sorts of types of retail businesses, so different categories of what you might buy, both within the food industry and more widely, and channel agnostic. So we have pure play retail businesses, people who just operate on high streets and in physical retail, and then more and more these days, the vast majority who operate across all the different channels. And our purpose is a sort of very high level purpose. Every trade association has a great mission, and ours is to make a positive difference to the retail industry and the customers it serves today and in the future. And I think really the word future is probably even more important with everything that's going on with the coronavirus than even it ever was. And certainly from an industry point of view, I mean, if any of you just think about how you shop, there was a real transformation going on in the way that we all shop, even before the pandemic hit. And I think we'll talk a bit more about the impact of the virus in a minute, but I've no doubt that lots of you have got direct experience of the world of retail, because, I mean, certainly I remember from when I was at school and studying as well. I took a job in retail. It's an industry that many people sort of pass through in their early years, and certainly I think it's one that if you ask a retailer, they sort of wonder why people don't necessarily think of retail as a career and just as a sort of summer job that they might have undertaken in the early part of their lives. And so part of my objective today is to really get you to think differently about retail as an industry, and to recognise that it is so much more than those sort of those part-time jobs that many of you will have experienced. And actually, it is the largest private sector employer across the whole of the country, and actually has been really at the forefront of lots of the sort of digital innovation that we've seen in the UK over the past few years. What I think the virus has done, though, is had a real impact of almost existential, which is always a word I struggle to say, existential proportions. I mean, just to highlight some of that, footfall, so which is a really common measure, so how many people come into physical locations, has fallen by around 90%, or certainly had up until the beginning of last week on the previous year. So the impact of lockdown, so many of us staying much more in our homes, and even once restrictions have been lifted, we've seen from other countries that that is not a tap that you turn straight back on as soon as those restrictions get lifted a bit. And actually, we've only seen footfall rise by about 15 or 25%, between 15 and 25% in those initial weeks. And certainly from a UK point of view, we're hoping that is a little bit better than that here, but we'll have to wait and see, because it's really early days. And I think the other thing just to think about, sort of in terms of sort of our own lives and the impact of the virus, at least in the totality of the industry, is the role that online retailing has played. And I don't know about you, but certainly it's been a real lifeline for many of us as we've sort of lived a different and more restricted life over the past few months. And if I sort of think, just concentrating on that impact of the virus for a minute, and just think about the different parts of the industry, and how there's a real sort of divergence of the sort of I don't know if it's right to call them the winners, but the side of the industry. Think of the food industry. The supermarkets have absolutely stepped up to be the part of the heroes, if you like, of the crisis, in that all the work that people who work in the industry have done, who are defined these days as key workers to keep us all as a nation fed, and the sort of the scale of some of those things was almost like back in those days of March, when there was so much panic buying going on, was like having sort of two Christmases in a couple of weeks with like no front end planning. And I think, while there were shortages of some products for a limited amount of time, none of us starved to death. There was plenty of food in the country, and they all rose to that challenge of getting their supply chains geared up, their staff all ready to be able to deliver all of that. And yet, at the other end of the spectrum, there are swathes of the industry that have been closed down completely through the enforced closures of shops, defined as non-essential retail. And while online has done really, really well, growing by about 50 to 60% year on year, whereas before the virus, it was only growing sort of between 5 and 10% year on year. That hasn't been enough to compensate for those stores that have been closed over the past few months. And it's in particular in clothing, in footwear, where that has been particularly hardest hit. And if you think about it, lots of our reasons for buying new clothes, so, going on holiday, going out to meet our friends, or going to the pub, whatever it might be, all those reasons potentially have been taken away. So those businesses have really invested a huge amount over the past few weeks to sort of gear up and be ready to be able to open last week. And I'm sort of trying to find some wood to touch. But it's early days. But I was just saying, as we were setting up the call, what I was talking to the chief executive of a business this morning, who said that normally all the letters that they get from their customers people only normally take the time to write when they've got something to complain about. And actually, he was really sort of heartened by the fact that many of their customers had taken time to write to him to say thank you for all the effort that they had made in making their stores feel safe. And I think that that is really a sort of a confidence building thing that has been so vital over the past few weeks and is going to carry on being so vital as we go forward in the coming months. And I think it also sort of highlights some of the breadth of thought processes that the retailers have had to go through in their preparations to get that ready. I mean, lots of us think about retail being just what we see. So, you know, the staff in the shop itself, the delivery driver that might come to our front door. Whereas actually, in order to be able to get to that point of readiness for reopening, or for the food retailers in dealing with all the sort of logistical challenges to be able to carry on feeding us all, the breadth of skills from everything from their sort of communicating digitally with customers, through the sort of supply chain and logistics that went with it, to all the back office processes to be able to deliver that, and to be able to shift so much of what had perhaps previously been happening in a store into the digital space has been huge, and really just highlights the sort of diversity of types of roles that are in the industry. And I think as we sort of look forward, there are many things that that many retailers are really concerned about in terms of what might happen to demand, because there's all sorts of questions from an economy point of view about whether there will be a big fallout. We've already seen the GDP figures that came out a couple of weeks ago that talked about that 20% fall during the course of April, and whether that will or won't translate into a big effect in terms of job losses across the economy, and that will potentially, if that does happen, have a real negative effect on demand, on people's spending capacity. And therefore, from a retailer's point of view, their profits, their cash flows have really been hit. It raises all sorts of questions about how many businesses will be able to continue trading. And I think what it will do is accelerate many of the sort of transformational changes that we were already seeing before the virus came along at all. And just to touch on a couple of those, which hopefully will provide plenty of hooks for some of the questions, we will see fewer stores in the future. That was a trend that was already happening. That sort of causes us to ask whether the store itself is dead. And actually, it really was, and I think the virus has just reinforced this, that what we have seen is while retailers will need less physical space, the role of local, whether that is retail or more broadly, the role of local, the role of community is going to continue to be really, really important. And so from a high street point of view, from a town centre point of view, what that therefore says is that we really, really need to think not just about retail as being the only thing that is in our local communities, but it does still have a key part, but it needs to be combined with a real a strategy, a real thought about how to reinvent those local spaces so that we have more housing, more care in the community as we go forward, more ways of interacting with our neighbours, whether that is through sort of leisure or other cultural activities, as well as retail. So fewer stores, high streets being different, online and digital continuing to grow and to be much more integrated between physical and digital retailing. I mean, to give you another example, I was talking to a different business, a non-food chief exec, but one who is running a company, a hardware kind of business that has been open throughout the lockdown. And what they were saying is that they have pivoted the whole of their business to click and collect, or a big proportion of it to click and collect from a store perspective. And they only could do that because of the integration that they had between their stores and digital. So that theme of online being a much more important part of retail, but being connected to physical, is one that we will continue to see. And then I think we will also continue to see retailers really thinking about how to bring service and experience and a real sort of uniqueness to the role of that physical space, completely different to just thinking about shops as places for transactions. So before the virus, everybody, the sort of buzzword in retail when you were talking about sort of shops was around experiential retail. So how you made it a much more interactive, digitally connected experience rather than just going into a shop to buy something. And I think that concept is going to be a little bit harder to implement in a potentially ongoing world of social distancing, depending on what happens from here. But I do think that the idea to have in your mind that actually that shopping won't just be about the sort of physical transaction, that the way that the retailer actually serves their customers and gives them the service and the ways of working that meet the needs of the customer in a really different way in the future is going to be a theme of much of what we might see. And then the other thing I think that was top of mind for many, but perhaps not as widespread as lots of us would like, is this whole theme of the sort of environmental and social impact of a business. So lots of people within retail have been talking about the sort of importance of purpose, the work that they are doing on reducing their environmental impacts, particularly against the backdrop of climate change. And I think, if I were to sort of characterize, there would have been bits of the industry where there was lots of sort of forward thinking, but it wasn't kind of across the piece. But the whole debate, which I think is a much broader one than from a retail point of view, is about whether the sort of negative impacts of the pandemic gives us all an opportunity to build back better and actually leverage some of the change that needed to happen anyway, and do that in a better way as we go forward. And I think the retail industry has got plenty of examples of where investment has been made in much, sustainable cotton, for example, and how you think much more about a circular economy in the context of the fashion industry, or in terms of the impact of CO2 emissions on our air quality, and how we can just make that much more widespread and get more traction. And I think the sort of impact of the virus gives us a real opportunity to do that, because I've never seen retailers so prepared to collaborate with each other than what we've seen over the course of the last few months, and to be able to show that they can achieve more in just a few weeks that would have taken years to achieve previously. So to sum up, I guess, before we move to questions, I suppose I will end on just encouraging you all to think about retail, to think about it in a different way, because certainly what I've learned in working with the industry for many years is that it really is, and you only have to look at lots of the people who are leading retail businesses, one of the few industries where people really can start at any level within the business and end up in the management team, or on the exec, or on the board, or even running many of the companies. And I think the Prime Minister has talked a lot about the fact that there is potential unemployment in the economy, and that might hit younger people more than others. And from a retail point of view, what we do have is an industry where about a quarter of the people who work in it are under 25, and I think with that as a backdrop, and one where we have an industry that is in huge transformation, and what transformation does is lead to opportunity, that sort of dynamism and resilience and need to evolve is actually it's not just a nice to have, it's a business imperative, it's a survival imperative. So don't overlook it as if at any point over the coming weeks, months and years you're thinking about what you might be doing in the future. I having worked in the industry for many decades, as I keep alluding to, I think that it is one, certainly as a country, that we can be very proud of what's been achieved over the past sort of few months, and that's a great foundation to build on. Super. Right, there's my 20 minutes, Abbas.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much, Helen, for that. That was a really good overview of retail as an industry and where it looks like it's going and things. And yeah, and as you can imagine, lots of questions come in, people picking up on different things that you've been saying. First one here coming from Katie, doing PP at Oxford. Katie asks, what do retailers need to do to make shopping into more of an experience?
Well, I think, as I was sort of alluding to there, it's kind of, is that a pre-COVID question or a post-COVID question? So I think certainly now the most important thing that they need to do, just to build confidence, even before we get to the experience bit, is to make sure that it's safe, that any customers feel that they can shop with confidence. And I don't think we should underestimate that in itself as part of an experience, because I don't know about you, but I've stood in quite a few queues over the course of the last however many months it's been, and there is even how you are asked where to stand and how you are looked after is all part of the experience. So I think there's some real hygiene factors that are absolutely vital and important in this kind of COVID world. I think as we look and perhaps a little bit further into the future, I think that the answer to that question depends on the type of product and the type of customers. because what it might mean, it might be all about service, for example. So if you're selling TVs and computers and washing machines, then experience will all be about how you help people to understand what they're buying, to connect it to their homes. Whereas if you're talking about a clothing business, it might be to do with helping your customers understand, the provenance of the products, how they've got there, the things that they might be concerned about, as well as helping them visualize how it impacts in their lifestyle and how they look. So it's I think that's a very long answer to a great question, but it sort of depends. And I suppose my other point was there is a sort of base case of a sort of hygiene factors that are actually we shouldn't take for granted in a sort of COVID situation, which is what we're in at the moment.
Sure, great. Yeah, definitely makes sense there. Here's another question from Liz, doing chemistry at KCL. Liz asks, do you think the pandemic might work out to overall be a good thing for retail, as it's reminded people just how much they like shopping, or the other way around?
I think it will. It has been a good thing in the sense of reminding people how important it is. So I think the fact that those hundreds of thousands of people who work in food retail, who've worked in online retail, in warehouses, in lorries, have been part of our lifeline over the course of the last 3 months. So the reputation for the people who work in the industry, I think, has gone right up on the back of the pandemic. So hopefully that will remain the case, because I think these people are all doing fantastically valuable jobs. I think the interesting bit of the question is to do with the interaction between physical and digital retailing, because as I said in my comments, because much of physical retail has been closed, online has grown almost through the roof. And the question is how much of that sticks going forward. And I think there is no doubt that some of it will, because a lot of people will have learnt new habits. But while digital has been crucial over the course of the last 3 months, I think the other thing that the pandemic has also made us realise is the importance of local, the importance of community, the importance of connectivity, the importance of places to go and to be and to share with our friends and neighbours. And so I think from a physical retail point of view, that reinforces the fact that that too absolutely has a future.
Okay, thanks very much. Here's a question from Nora, doing geography at Edinburgh. Nora says, I've seen a lot about plans to make shops much smaller and more personalised. What's the best way to make shops more personalised when they continue to be part of large chains?
There's great questions here. I think over the course of probably the last 20 years, what has happened, or what did happen, was that many of the larger retail businesses created a model, and then they just rolled out that model in lots of different places. They might have tweaked it a bit, depending on whether it was a big city or a small town, but it was a sort of very specific, pick it up, move it, and put it somewhere else. I think, so the answer to this question is absolutely coming back to what I was saying before about local and community, and that is empowering people who work in those businesses, in those local areas, to be much more connected to their local community, And actually, if the local authority, if other businesses in that area, to be able to work together to encourage people to come into those places, and so to actually shop in them. So the best way to make them more personalized is to empower the people who work locally to take more decisions that are relevant to their local community, so that there is a real lens, even if they might be part of a bigger business, that is focused on the needs of their local area.
Got a very nice question here from Wei, doing history at UCL. Wei says, working in retail, this pandemic must have been challenging for you. What are your thoughts on the government stimulus approach? Do you think it feels sustainable?
Well, that is a great question. It says, how much longer have we got on this exactly? So this is my life. I can't pronounce the name of the person. Wei, is it? And so this has been my life over the course of the last 3 months. Because that's sort of the main role of the trade association, is to try and influence government to do things that support the industry that you're representing, or to not do things that would be harmful to it. And so over the course of the period of the virus, I mean, we have had conversations and action from government on everything from needing to suspend parts of competition law in order to be able to get some of the food retailers to collaborate more than they might otherwise be allowed to do in order to free up the supply chains, to trying to influence the job retention scheme, the various loan schemes, the business rates holiday. So there has been, without any doubt any doubt at all, a huge amount of support that has come from government to many parts of the economy, and particularly to retail and to hospitality, that have also been at the front end of many of the impacts as well. So from where I'm sitting, I think the government's approach has been really good. We have worked better with them than we've ever worked before. Does that mean that it's all done and dusted and finished? I don't think so, because I think we've still got a very cautious consumer out there, and we've still got an economy that where the jury is out as to how negatively impact it's going to be. So I think what happens from here is going to be critical. And I think that's where the bit of the question that's quite significant is, do you think it's sustainable? Because I think what we need to ensure is that whatever else might happen really has that business case associated with it to make sure that anything that continues to support the industry to be able to survive or to invest gets a circular benefit back round into the economy. And that's certainly the way that we've been talking about it with government.
Okay, brilliant. Here's a question from Adam doing politics at LSE. Adam says, I saw that you wrote recently that service is going to be even more important in this environment. What are best practices you recommend for staff to stand out positively?
Someone's quoting me something I've said. Okay, I'm sure. I would have said that because I think I even said it earlier this evening. So I think the best practices for staff to stand out positively. I think the first is about thinking really, really carefully about who their customers are, because I don't know about you, any of you, Adam, any of you listening. If you feel that the person who is interacting with you, whether it's from a call center, internet chats or in a shop aren't being sincere and really listening to you and are sort of following some sort of script, or aren't sort of concerned about ensuring that you get the right outcome, then that is not going to be a positive interaction from a customer point of view. So I think the overarching best practice is, and how you teach this to people, is about the sort of empathy and the connectivity that they have with their customers. And lots of sort of people in retail talk about the some of the recruitment that they try to do, which is recruiting for attitude as opposed to necessarily sort of the skill base, because I think you'll know which businesses you like interacting, because you can feel the difference in terms of what that service actually feels like. And it often is quite an intangible thing, but it all at the end of the day hinges on this. I think it hinges on the ability of the person who works for the retail businesses to really care about the person that they're serving and meeting their needs, even if it might not necessarily have the most immediate best outcome from the company. They have to put the needs of the customer first.
Brilliant. Okay, we've got a question here about accounting, actually, from Thomas, doing engineering at Imperial. Thomas says, I saw that you used to work for KPMG as a partner and head of retail. I've got an offer from a Big Four. What advice do you have about mapping out your career in the Big Four?
Right. Well, what advice do I have? My advice would be, I mean, I think while I'm here sort of trying to persuade you to think about retail as well as tell you about it. So in terms of the Big Four, I think that, well, just whether it's the Big Four or more widely, I mean, accountancy as a foundation for a career is a really great foundation, because you really get to see lots of different types of businesses, to get an understanding of how any of them work, and so whether it's that you decide to do, and I can certainly recommend after 20 plus years in KPMG that is a great foundation, but whether it's doing something like that or whatever it is that you decide to do, I think the biggest piece of advice that I would have is about just being open to learn and experience new things. I mean, I had no idea when I started at KPMG that I would have stayed there for as long as I did, that I would end up working with retail clients when I was there. And I certainly wouldn't have thought that I would have ended up doing the job that I am now doing at the BRC. And I think that, hopefully, she says, with the benefit of hindsight, came from a mindset of being open to move around and see new and different things. And so having that openness of perspective, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. Here's a question from Abby, doing law at Oxford. Abby asks, other than online presence, what other factors do you think distinguish retailers that have survived and those that haven't under pressure put on the high street even before COVID?
I think the online one is a biggie. I think that I'm writing as Abby is asking that question. If I think back over the last few weeks, I would say probably the next one that I would highlight is about sort of agility. So as a sort of speed to respond and the flexibility to do that. I think what I've seen so much of in the past few weeks is businesses that have completely shifted the way that they were working, and how they think about what they do, and have been able to sort of respond to a changing set of circumstances. So I think while the sort of business model, though, the sector that you're in, how much you had an online business have been sort of key kind of determinants as to whether you at least started in a winning or losing kind of bucket. But I think those in the sort of margins of each of those that have either have or haven't been agile and flexible and been able to sort of move their ways of thinking and their ways of operating to a completely different sort of timescale and crisis and emergency situation, those are the ones, whether they're online, in the high street, wherever they are, that are more likely to be able to survive and thrive.
Okay, a question here from Mehar, doing economics at Warwick. Mehar asks, do retailers anticipate that people have had enough of big shopping centres?
I think that's another great question, particularly on the back of, I'm assuming that Mihar is asking that on the back of the impact of the virus. The feedback since retail non-essential shops have opened over the course of the last week, and this is consistent with the feedback across the rest of Europe and other developed countries, is that in reverse order, so the worst, the areas that are struggling most for people to come back in, for people to feel confident in shopping in, and for people to get to potentially is city centres. So London at the top, some of the other major cities across the UK. So that is proving really challenging. The next is shopping centres, because of just that, people's having less confidence about being more in those sorts of spaces. And then it's really the sort of local and community and sort of more national places that have done better. So I think the answer to your question really will depend on what happens with hospitality, because I think a lot of shopping centres thrive on the combination of being able to eat out as well as to shop, and then that then depends on what happens with 2 meters and 1 meter, which is a big debate at the moment and is potentially likely to change over the course of the next 24 hours. So watch this space. But also what happens with the virus over the course of the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months and going forward. And so I don't know is the answer to that question. I think people are rightly nervous about it, but it does depend on what happens more widely with the virus and what we need to do from a health perspective over the coming months.
Yeah, it's very difficult to say, isn't it? Here's a question from Olivia, doing medicine at UCL. Olivia asks, with the rise of fancy fast food places like Pret, Itsu and Leon nationwide, how much of high streets do you think are going to be taken over by similar establishments?
I'm not sure whether Olivia means similar establishments in terms of chains or whether she means sort of independence. But I think what we will see is more independent businesses on high streets and up and down the country. But that is going to take a little bit of time to feed through, because of the way that the property system works in the UK, in that leases are normally quite long, although they have been getting shorter, and they're quite difficult to get out of and so there is quite a lot of empty space that is in perhaps secondary locations. So the price of that space needs to come down, and as the same needs to happen in some of the more busy locations. And I actually think that will be taken up as much by local and independent businesses as it will be through some of the chains as well.
Okay, here's a question from Matt, who's doing law at KCL. Matt asks, I spent a summer in retail and found a lot of dealing with customers can be very difficult. I feel like this part of it puts a lot of people off the job. Is there some way around this?
Well, so I think that I don't know what part of retail Matt was working in. I think it's interesting, isn't it? I suppose so. One answer, which doesn't quite answer the question, is to not just think about retail as being in a shop and interacting with customers, because actually, consider some of the things that we've been touching on today, whether that's the supply chain, logistics, the sourcing of goods, the whole sort of online and social media marketing of them, the connectivity of with customers that sits way outside what happens in a shop. So the first sort of bit of the answer is it isn't just about that. So there are plenty of other jobs in retail that are much broader than what we as customers can see. And I think that I guess it comes down to sort of, the personalities of individual people. Some people, find it a challenge and a real opportunity in terms of trying to bring customers on side and give them great service. So I guess it's horses for courses in the sense of that first bit. But I suppose my main point is to really think about retail in its totality, as opposed to it just being a job that is related to what happens in what we can see.
Brilliant. Here's a question from Imran, doing computer science at Cambridge. Imran says, it's very admirable to hear about your advocacy for the high street and wider retail. What have you found to be the most difficult thing about the past few months?
That question? No. I think the most difficult thing, and this is a bit personal, but the most difficult thing I think it's been 3 months, and it's pretty much been 3 months full on throughout the whole of that 3 months, because the first half of it was all about food retail, gearing it up, helping it to be able to deliver through this huge spike in demand that we saw and all the challenges that went with that. And that would have been quite a sort of challenging thing in itself. But then we had completely the opposite set of issues from a non-food point of view, from the parts that were actually closed, as to how did we provide the right support, the right information. I mean, we were doing our own sort of guidance on safety even before the government got there. So the most difficult thing has been trying to have these two ends of the spectrum kind of going on at the same time. I mean, the BRC is I've only 50 people, right? We're not a gigantic organization. My team is 50 people. And so we had to do exactly what I was describing earlier, that the good businesses, hopefully we have done a good job. I'm really proud of the job we've done. I mean, but we had to completely pivot the way that we were operating in terms of with government and with our members, and we had to be agile. And that's been rather a tiring exercise. So I think that the most difficult thing has really just been keeping up the momentum under sort of pretty challenging circumstances, but done with the support of a great team. So I feel that it's made it all possible by the fact that I've had such great support from both my team and from the retailers as well.
That's great. Here's a question from Jessica. Jessica's doing psychology at Durham. Jessica asks, your work with the charity Working Chance sounds really interesting. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about it and your experience there.
Okay, so yeah, I'm sure you can probably, and I expect lots of people are probably online at the moment, you can Google Working Chance. So they are a charity that helps women ex-offenders get jobs. And so if you think about sort of like a recruitment agency, so it was literally like a recruitment agency for women who'd been in prison. And I think the most interesting is probably the wrong word, or depressing thing in working with Working Chance that I found, and I think this is the case for many who've done something wrong in their life, and it's the consequences have kind of lived with them forever, is there is a huge amount of discrimination against people who've been to prison, served their time, and actually the importance of getting a job for those people is the thing that takes them out of a vicious cycle of reoffending. And I think for women, I think it's about 50% of women who come out of prison end up back in prison. And yet what Working Chance did was help people as they were coming out in getting a job, getting everything that sat around it, getting all that sorted. And because that was so important to those people, that they were probably a better set of employees than the rest of us, and therefore that that discrimination that many companies have is completely undeserved. And the reoffending rate for people who'd done that through Working Chance, I think, was less than 3%. So it's kind of like you look at stories like that, and you look at it and you go, why is a charity like this? This is proper. This is what government. Why aren't they thinking like this? Because actually, all that money that is being saved because all those people are not ending up back in prison or doing something bad for society. They are contributing and they're doing something good. So I think Working Chance is just one. It's an amazing charity, but I know that there are lots of other charities out there that do great things like that and really deserve all the support that they can get, because they really are making a difference to people's lives on the ground, and it's very inspiring to see.
Yeah, that sounds great. Here's a question from Seb doing E&M at Oxford. Seb asks, how much better equipped now do you think the retail industry is for a potential second wave of the virus than it was for the first?
How much more equipped are any of us for a second wave of the virus than the first? How much more equipped? I suppose in terms of sort of how to operate sort of physically, which is what we're seeing at the moment, I think that they're exponentially more equipped. I think that where it gets difficult is if, retail businesses, like lots of other businesses, they've got lots of costs. And if for some reason their business just gets curtailed, like we saw over the last few months for certain parts of the retail industry, then any company's ability to be able to do that on on a long-term basis becomes less and less possible the longer the period is. So I think the risk of a second wave to how many businesses will fail is the main thing that we should be worried about. Hopefully, from a country point of view, if there is any sort of new wave, let's not call it a second wave, any sort of new wave, it's much more local, and therefore it won't have the same economy-wide negative impact as what's happened already. But I guess that comes back to, the quality of the track and trace system, what happens in terms of the R rate, the infection rate. So hopefully any sort of vaccine, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they're much better equipped to deal with the sort of practicalities on the ground, but they're not, they don't have, a magic money pot, I think is the, political term, to be able to continue to survive if their income that tap was turned off again.
Yeah, going slightly conscious of time. Do you think maybe two more questions, perhaps? Sort of end up around the hour mark. Does that sound more or less all right? Don't want to keep you for too long.
Okay.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, yes, let's go. Second last question here from Jack. Jack's doing maths at UCL. Jack asks, there has been talk that the Chancellor may introduce temporary cuts to VAT and further specific reductions for some sectors. How big of a difference could this make to retail?
I think it could make a big difference. So we wrote to the Chancellor last week, and we suggested that that might be on his list of things to do. So Jack is obviously, like me, been reading the papers over the weekend, and it's sort of looking like that may well be on the agenda. I think the reason for suggesting it is because Jack's doing maths. I'm sure you've got plenty of economists on the call as well, and maybe Jack even knows the answer to this. But from a sort of an economist perspective, you put money into the economy, which is basically what a VAT cut would do, and that therefore creates and stimulates demand across the economy. So I think while even, whether it's 2.5% or 5%, it might not sound like a lot. If you have a gigantic volume, even if it's small marginal differences, because of the volume effect, then that will actually have a big impact. So I think it would be a good thing for retail. It won't necessarily be a sort of magic bullet that's going to plug the hole that's been left by the sort of £2 billion a week that was being lost by various businesses being closed, but it would be a good thing.
Brilliant. Yeah, no magic bullets, unfortunately. Here's a question, probably a good one to end on, perhaps, from Anne doing maths at Imperial. Anne asks, she asks, as a woman who has reached the top of a competitive industry, what advice do you have for young women going into business?
Gosh, that's a great question, Anne. My advice, I guess my biggest piece of advice is to be, and again, I don't know how valuable it is, but that is, if I was a younger me, if I'd had this advice, that would have been helpful. If only I was a younger me. People talk a lot about authenticity. And I feel like it's taken me like a long time to sort of realize the importance of just worrying a little bit less about, I think you still do, but a little bit less about the perception so much of others, and trying to be something that people expect you to be. So I think it's really important that that individuals, and particularly women, but everybody, all of us, really have the confidence to be ourselves. Because actually, and again, this is a bit of a generalization, but women's ways of working are not necessarily all the same as male ways of working, but actually, they are as good, and in some circumstances, get better outcomes. And I think just sort of recognizing that it's that diversity of thought, and that there isn't one way of doing things, I think is the most important thing. That if someone had said that to me a long time ago, I might not have wasted so much time in trying to sort of fit in or do things in the way that I saw other people doing them.
Great. I said last question on the last one. We just had quite an interesting one come in, which we thought might be good to end on. It's a question from Leanne, doing history at Cambridge. Leanne asks, you've worked with the government during this crisis. While a lot of the press about their handling of it has been very negative, how have you found it personally, if of course you can say?
Yeah, hopefully there's no members of the government listening. I don't expect that. So I would say, on the whole, it's been very good. So we have seen more action from government over the course of the last 12 weeks than probably, I've been in my job at the BRC for 7 years. So we collectively with them have been able to achieve more in that 12-week period than probably much of the rest of it combined. And I think, so they have been listening to what, businesses, trade bodies such as ourselves have been saying to them, and acting. So the job retention scheme, how it worked, the need to extend it. Some of the loan schemes weren't, there was big gaps in the market in terms of sizes of businesses that were covered. So that needed to be addressed. Then there've been other sort of anomalies in terms of the way that many of those things worked. Government have really sort of geared up to a different way of working. I think where some of the negative press comes from, and where I think they have got a point, is that government is not really geared up in the way that companies and businesses are. So I don't know, think of some of the things that they've been criticised for, like the procurement of PPE, of personal protective equipment into the NHS and into the care sector. So that's the sort of thing that if somebody was running, say, a retail business or whatever, would have had the thought processes as to what needed to happen and how to actually go about procuring it. But that's not what government normally does. So I think where they've really struggled is thinking in that that sort of different way, where it's been something that is a complete area outside their comfort zone. Whereas where it has worked well, going back to what I was saying in the beginning, is in things that have where it's a regulatory thing. So yes, they think about regulation and where they need to put in place something, and then we're trying to shape it with them, and then they can make sure that they get it right. So that has been good. But where it's been much more sort of outside of their comfort zone and something that's completely different, that's perhaps where they've come more of a cropper.
Fantastic. So on that note, thank you very much, Helen, for taking the time to speak and share your insights with us in what has been a truly informative and interesting session. Thank you also to everyone watching for all of your varied and rather challenging questions. We look forward to welcoming you again all soon at our upcoming events. Thank you very much.
Super. Bye.